and welcome to the ACE episodes. Today I'm going to touch on something I said in my last ACE episode that a very helpful commenter actually pointed out. In my last video I stated that asexuality is not a result of trauma, but that it can be. And someone commented on my video saying asexuality can't be a result of trauma. So I thought I'd touch on that today because I was pretty sure that when I first started looking into asexuality, there were people who claimed their asexuality was a result of their trauma, and I would hate to be the person who erases their identity just because other aces feel offended by it. So this morning I did a bit more research and I thought that I'd share it with you and we could learn together about how other aces identify and why they identify the way they do. And before I get into it, I want to put out there that however one ace feels is completely valid, even if another ace doesn't feel that way. So as you can see on the screen, I have saved a few links. I also saved a subreddit that I found helpful, and I'm just going to go through them with you so we can learn a little bit about how asexuals identify and why they identify the way they do. The first one is the website of a podcast by two people called Meg, John and Justin, and their post is briefly explaining their podcast of the 15th of November 2019 called Asexuality and Trauma. Exactly the topic we want to look into. This week on the podcast, we addressed a listener's question about how we might go about knowing whether we are on the ace spectrum or whether our lack of sexual attraction is due to trauma in our life, which perhaps we should address. In the podcast, we unpack a lot of what is meant by both asexuality and trauma, as well as considering the overlaps and how all of us might address elements of trauma as the surface in our sexual lives. There are lots of different ways of being asexual, all of which are absolutely legitimate and valid. Just as it shouldn't matter why an allosexual person is allosexual, it shouldn't really matter whether these diverse asexualities are a result of being born that way or choosing asexuality as a response to problematic cultures of sexuality or life experiences meaning you're asexual. For most of us, it's probably a complex combination of bio, psycho, and social aspects. Historically, asexual people have been treated as if their low or no sexual attraction must be a problem, often with the assumption that it's the result of trauma. The first thing to say is that, as with most marginalised sexual communities, there is no evidence that asexual people are more likely to have been abused or to suffer from mental health problems than anyone else. Secondly, we could all argue that all of our sexualities or asexualities have something to do with trauma. One, sadly, high numbers of us experience sexual forms of abuse, assault and bullying as children and or adults. And two, the restrictive messages we receive about sexuality are a form of intergenerational trauma. Over the generations, sex ed, sex advice, parents, porn, Hollywood movies, magazines, etc. all pass on limited ideas about what counts as sex and how we should have sex, which lead many people having sex which is painful, unwanted, mediocre, even non-consensual. All those caveats aside, of course it can still be important for those of us who are asexual, whether for a period or for the longer term, and have also been through traumatic experience, to reflect on whether these things are related. It is possible that they are somewhat related, completely related, or not related at all. You might just happen to be ace, and you might happen to be traumatized. Again, all of those options are equally valid. A lot of people's sexualities are shaped by traumatic things that happen to them. It's fine to be ace, it's fine to be traumatized, it's fine for those things to be linked or not, and it's useful for all of us to explore our sexuality, trauma, and how these things may or may not be linked. The second link is a really short one, I believe. This one just describes a study about trauma and asexuals. They aim to assess whether identification as asexual was associated with greater likelihood of self-reported PTSD. It basically found that among non-asexual participants, 1.9% self-reported a diagnosis of PTSD, and 2.4% reported a history of sexual trauma in the past 12 months. Among the group identified as asexual, 6.6% self-reported a diagnosis of PTSD, and 3.5% reported a history of sexual assault in the past 12 months. Individuals who identified as asexual were more likely to report a diagnosis of PTSD and sexual trauma within the past 12 months, compared to non-asexual individuals. But I didn't pay that one too much attention because it didn't discuss whether or not they correlate, and it didn't really look into much else other than the fact that asexuals were a tiny bit more likely to have experienced trauma than non-asexuals. So that one wasn't particularly helpful. So I kept looking, and of course we got to Avon. God bless Avon. So this is a forum post by a person called Sarah, and they'd been considering the possibility that they're asexual for more than 5 years. They'd experienced an abusive relationship, sexual abuse, and the sex that was not abusive was never enjoyable and always felt obligatory. Is it possible for it to have been trauma-induced? Someone responded with, I feel the same way. Although labels can be overwhelming, they make things easy for me at the same time. From what I know, people usually aren't asexual because of their experiences. They simply don't feel that sexual attraction, and it's 100% normal. However, I don't share your experiences, so what I say here might not necessarily apply to you. In the end, what you choose to identify as is up to you, and only you yourself truly understand your experiences and feelings. Someone else simply put, just because you've changed in response to trauma doesn't make your identity and choice any less valid. And I feel that. I 100% feel that. The final link before I go on to the Reddit post is a blog post about past trauma affecting sexuality. So this person was in a session with their therapist and spoke about their sexual trauma. And the therapist clicked her tongue and said, based on what you told me, I think we can safely say you aren't asexual. Your trauma probably just made you scared of sexual intimacy. I had to, and still do, respectfully disagree with her. Being born this way had always been the easiest thing to accept about my queerness. Before the abuse started, I still had never grown out of the ew cooties phase when thinking about kissing. My crushes always looked more like I want to play video games with that person than anything else, and I didn't understand the point when my friends growing up started being more interested in dating. But that one statement was enough to make me question it. And this is why aphobia is bad, people. What if this part of myself I've worked hard to accept isn't a part of who I am, but a response to the horrible things that happened to me? What if being asexual isn't one of the facets of my identity, but a trauma-induced aversion to touch or intimacy? Something I convinced myself of because it was easier than the alternative. My mind swam with the possibility of it all. If my asexuality was caused by trauma, then working through the trauma might mean curing the asexuality. To be clear, asexuality is not a disorder to be cured. No sexual or gender identity is. But I must admit, the idea was tempting. Studies suggest that LGBTQ+ people are disproportionately more likely to be sexually abused in childhood and adolescence, and more likely to develop mental health issues such as PTSD. And then we go to the comments. I didn't actually read the comments this morning, so this is going to be new to me. Someone said, I struggle with the fear of getting better from my trauma because I don't want to lose my asexuality. Maybe I'm atypical, but I'm not broken. Okay, so onto the Reddit post. This is one I found on Asexuality. It's called Trauma-Related Asexuality. I'm not going to read it out because there is a lot of triggering content in there, but it is, again, the same concept. They'd dealt with abuse and they think that their asexuality could be caused by trauma or sexual assault and wonder if it's valid. So we're gonna see what the people of Reddit say. Trauma changes people. You might go back to feeling the way you did before, with therapy and years of healing, but you also might not. People's feelings and identities can certainly change even when trauma isn't involved, so the possibility that you might not feel this way in future doesn't really matter unless by the future you mean like next week. Sexuality is about how you feel in the here and now. Do you consider yourself to be asexual currently, even if you didn't before? Does the identity help you at all, or just feel right at the moment? If so, you're welcome to identify as asexual if you want, for as long as you feel that way. In conclusion, yes, that's definitely valid. I was assaulted when I was a child, and I think it might be the cause of my lack of interest in sex during puberty and the time of sexual discovery. But even after therapy and having disclosed everything about my trauma and having seriously got over it, I'm still asexual and aromantic. Is it solely because of trauma? Maybe, but I can't be sure. The only thing I do know is that even if I have spikes of repulsion against sex, I am comfortable and happy identifying as an aroace, regardless of the reasoning behind it. So having found all these people who identify as asexual post-trauma, I do stick by the belief that asexuality can come from trauma. But that doesn't mean it does. I know linking trauma to asexuality can be so harmful. But whether your asexuality stems from trauma or not, one thing we do want to remember is that asexuality is not a bad thing. You're valid whether you're traumatized or not. I'll link all the websites I use below, as well as other sources. I love you very much, and I will see you next time with another video. Bye!